and a warm welcome. You're joining us tonight at Hyde Park on Ada Derana 24, and we've decided to talk about Sri Lanka's capital market challenges and the opportunities ahead for investors, and especially foreign investors, and how we attract foreign investors going forward. To discuss all this, we've invited to our studios the Chairman of Securities and Exchange Commission, Viraj, Dayaratne. A very warm welcome to you. And we also do have with us the Chairman of the Colombo Stock Exchange, Dilshan Wirasekara.
Thank you.
Warm welcome to you as well. We're talking about Sri Lanka's capital market facing challenges, but at the same time, Sri Lanka as a nation, we have been in this economic crisis and looking at ways out. To address critical needs, Sri Lanka should find more foreign investors to come in so that that money flows into the country. And we'd also like to talk about market infrastructure in order to attract these foreign investors. So let's start off there. I'd like your comments on what plans the Securities and Exchange Commission together with the Colombo Stock Exchange has to address Sri Lanka's broader question.
Yeah, so Indeewari, to begin with, the past few months, the last 3 to 4 months, has seen a net foreign inflow. So we are particularly happy about that, notwithstanding the current economic situation in the country. The foreign investors have had faith in our markets, and they are coming back. So that's a good sign. I think it's after about 3 or 4 years that we are having a net foreign inflow. So I think it's the ideal time for them to come in, because with the rupee depreciation, I think it's cheap for them to buy our shares. So that's a good sign, and that shows the faith the foreign investors have. But, so as far as taking steps rather to attract foreign investment, well, there's a lot to be done. Unfortunately, the last couple of years didn't permit us to do much because of the pandemic and then the travel restrictions and so on. And however, notwithstanding those impediments, we've done 2 road shows together with the Colombo Stock Exchange, one in Dubai, where there was a very positive response. Then one in London in March. Unfortunately, with the discussions we had with the would-be investors, the community, Sri Lankan community living there, as well as the fund representatives from funds, the response was very positive, but unfortunately the events that took place thereafter didn't result in the expected the response that we expected. So there is we need to market the Sri Lankan capital market to foreigners, and in that regard, Indeewari, actually the Securities and Exchange Commission spearheaded a drive together with our foreign missions, where we educated them on our markets, what potential is there for foreign investors. And what we wanted was, since there were travel restrictions where we could, where the stock exchange and the SEC could not go over to those countries, we expected the foreign missions to take over that task in a limited way, where they could on their own reach out to the would-be investors. So that is something that we are continuing with.
But has this proven successful so
Yeah,
far?
so it took off in Indeewari, but unfortunately I think the time was also not very conducive for them to market Sri Lanka. So it has taken somewhat of a backseat, but we wish to take that forward in the future.
Right. And from the Colombo Stock Exchange side, we're talking about improving infrastructure. So what plans ahead towards this?
So we've already, I think, embarked upon quite a few initiatives in Indeewari. I think the first was the DVP system that was introduced a couple of years ago. The biggest project right now that we have at hand is looking at the CCP, the Central Counterparty Settlement System, that will bring the Colombo Stock Exchange on par with other worldwide or regional exchanges, and eliminating to a great extent that settlement risk that we currently have. Now, this is a big need for foreign investment flows coming in. Even though we've run a successful market without a settlement failure over the last so many years, I think it's important to have that infrastructure in place. So that's being done. We've also looked at upgrading our order management systems and our broker back office systems, currently in process. I must thank the chairman of the SEC also, who took the initiative to set up joint committees of the SEC and CSE, which has been a turning point for me really in terms of getting these initiatives, action and executing these plans. Because then you have the regulator in conjunction with the market operator who essentially then gets the legal framework, the regulations, all of those in place to enable that change to happen. So we've done that, but let me also touch a little bit about the macroeconomic perspective and the outlook, because I think there's so much an exchange or a regulator can do if you have macroeconomic issues, and that's what really happened to Sri Lanka. So I think we all know we went through this crisis. We hit sort of rock bottom maybe in April, May when we defaulted on our currencies. But since then, it is commendable that we've taken fairly significant reform steps, from depreciating the currency to increasing exchange interest rates to pricing commodities appropriately, and finally very recently signing a staff level agreement with the IMF with further reforms now in place. So I think that confidence that we are now in a path to reform has trickled down to the capital markets as well, and as a result, like the Chairman SEC said, for the first time in 4 years since 2017, we have a net inflow to market from both fronts. You have a primary market, you have a secondary market. So we have a primary market surplus as well as a secondary market inflow, totaling to almost 30 billion rupees for the year. Just to give you context, we had close to 50 billion of outflows for the last 2 years in 21 and 20. So I think with all these steps to do with the infrastructure, digitalization, that we hope we'll see more foreign investors coming into the CSE.
When we talk about bringing the Colombo Stock Exchange and Sri Lanka's markets on par with regional investors in markets, we're also talking about the regulatory framework here. How attractive is it? Is it safe here in Sri Lanka for global investors, although we do extend invitations to them? So from the SEC side, as chairman of the market regulator, what measures are we taking going forward, other than the Stock Market Act that was brought in last year, and how far are the enforcements and what is the progress there?
Yeah, so Indeewari, with the coming into force of the new law, the regulatory regime was further strengthened. I think that was a significant step towards ensuring and sending the message that this is a safe market to come and invest in. So we have several regulatory measures that were introduced, and we have made use of them. And let me tell you, as a regulator, we have not allowed things to happen and waited to take action once something happened. We have a real-time surveillance system, and whenever they had some suspicion of untoward activity taking place, we've taken the step of speaking to them. Those who we felt were on the verge of maybe committing an offense. We've spoken to them and told you, look here, please stop. This is not permitted. You can't proceed in this manner. That has had a tremendous impact, although many would not know that we have been taking that step. That has minimized the commission of offenses. In Indeewari, if you take during the last two and a half years, the surveillance referrals that our surveillance division and the surveillance division of the stock exchange generated have come down. So I think that has had a very drastic impact. And the other measures that we have taken, we have expedited the conclusion of investigations that have been going on. Of course, most of these investigations were in respect of offences or suspected offences that had committed long years ago. We have concluded many. Unfortunately, it's not easy. It's not an easy task, but that's no excuse. We need to get on with the investigations and conclude them. We have done that, and we have taken a fair amount of enforcement action in the recent past, and we have set deadlines for ourselves to complete the investigations that are pending, and I'm hopeful before the end of the year we will conclude a majority of the investigations, if not all. And so that gives confidence. As you know, you need confidence that the perception that one has about a market matters a lot in Indeewari. So we need to create that perception amongst would-be investors, not only for foreigners, even for locals. So as the chairman of the CSE said, having proper infrastructure, because if particularly foreign funds, if they were to invest in our market, they have a tick box. So they will look at our market and see whether what they look for is in fact there. So Dilshan mentioned about the DVP implementation, the digitalization, where there is ease of opening an account and trading. Now we are in the process of moving into having a CCP in place. So those infrastructure developments, together with the confidence, the environment that we have created with regard to the confidence that is much needed, I think we have set the necessary atmosphere.
Before we look ahead, you mentioned about suspicious activities, offences that may be committed, and the SEC has always been proactive in mitigating these acts. But where is this coming from? We're talking about investors, large-scale investors to small-scale investors. So where is all this coming from?
Yeah,
and
so
is there really room in the system?
No, there is always room. Indeewari, it can come. These can be committed by investors, maybe the market intermediaries. So it can happen through different participants. We have different market participants. So any one of them can commit these malpractices or offences. So we, as I said, with the proactive approach that we have adopted, we have minimized the commission of any offences or malpractices. And I'm happy to say there was a lot of social media activity that was taking place, which was really detrimental to the market. The information that was wrong information that was being disseminated. And I'm happy to say after the new act was brought in, we had a new mechanism called administrative sanctions, where we could slap a administrative sanction on wrongdoers, not the major offences. And just last week, the Commission decided to impose an administrative sanction on a market participant, a market intermediary, to impose a penalty, as well as with regard to one of those who work for the market participant, where we have imposed a sanction against him. So these are little by little.
So far, how many have been really?
Yeah. So as far as administrative sanctions are concerned, now that can be imposed on offenders after the new act came into being. You can't make use of that provision to punish those who have committed any offence prior to the new act coming into force. So we have just started. That's why I said the first such action was taken. The Commission decided on that at the last Commission meeting. So we are working hard. And we have seen a decline in some of these activity. I think they are again due to the proactive steps that we take at an early stage. And also I think once we take these steps, it will act as a deterrent.
Right. We spoke at the beginning about foreign investor inflows after an outflow of some over 50 billion rupees last year. For the first time in 4 years, Sri Lanka's stock exchange sees an inflow, and in September alone, over 9.4 billion. Where do you expect to conclude the year, and where do you expect these indicators to go by the end of the year?
So I think I'm hopeful that the foreign investment will continue to trickle in. I can't give you a number in the way to forecast what that number would be at the year end. But I think if the macro conditions remain stable, and if we are able to sign a board level agreement, which is the next key step in the process, that will add to confidence. Because from a foreign perspective, you have to look at someone coming in is getting 80% higher rate on their rupees coming into it on a already price adjusted market. So if you look at our valuations, we are trading at about 5.5 times on our price earnings, trailing price earnings, maybe a little over 1 time in book value. And if you just compare that to regional markets, you would find that regional markets are trading at more than double those valuations. You know, maybe 2 times book, maybe 17 to 18 times price earnings. So I think foreigners, as long as they have confidence in the macro aspects and stability, will definitely pick up shares because they are bargains right now. So I'm hopeful that the foreign investment would continue throughout the year, and that we would record probably one of the highest numbers we've had in recent history.
The digitalization process, we saw in August, somewhere in August, that you completed the third phase of it. But this is a market set up somewhere in 1985. So how are we looking at making it more attractive to foreign investors going forward, apart from ensuring that the regulatory framework is tight and that we ensure that there is a safer trading platform? What new financial instruments are you also thinking of?
Yeah, so that's been a big hindrance in the way I do concede. I think we've been a dual product market for far too long. So we have plain vanilla equity and we have some listed debt. And those are really essentially the only instruments that are traded. We've looked at introducing new products. So we've got the legislation for REITs in place. Unfortunately, the current interest rate environment isn't as conducive to launch REITs out. So we've not had any arranger come or a manager come and launch a REIT yet, but technically it is possible to get REITs out. We are looking at short selling as a quick new product, because we feel otherwise the market is always one-sided. This allows a hedge for investors. It also allows foreigners to maybe take bets on the other side of the fence in terms of equity positions. We are looking at mortgage-backed securities, which we feel you have a securitized or collateralized sort of debt instruments that listed, which will also make the banking sector more efficient in terms of being able to churn capital around faster. And we are also looking at maybe certain other commodity-based products getting listed. A gold-backed product is a fairly easy win, easily structured product that we can introduce. So we've sort of conceptualized a lot of these new products. We are currently in discussion with the regulator in terms of amending the rules that are required to bring these products out, as well as thereafter creating awareness amongst investors and the public so that they actually come and trade these products on the exchange.
What is the timeline that you're thinking of?
So we are looking at a fairly short timeline. I think by about mid of 2023, we hope to have most of these instruments that I just spoke of coming onto the market in some form.
And how open?
Just to add to that, Indeewari, just to add to what the chairman of the CSE said, now the gold-backed products is something that the SEC has granted in principle approval, and I think the CSE is preparing the legal regime as far as gold-backed products is concerned. Then we have also facilitated repurchase agreements on corporate debt securities. There again we have approved the initial legal framework. Then with regard to bonds, both green bonds as well as the introduction of blue bonds in principle approval has been granted by the SEC. Then one other interesting development will be the approval we granted for the introduction of Islamic capital market products.
Right.
So there are a lot of new products which will come in. We have given the in principle approval, and the CSE actually is working on the legal framework. So some of them we have, I think they are nearing completion, Dilshan, if I'm correct. And once the legal framework is in place, we are ready to introduce them.
You're a President's Counsel yourself, you have your legal background. So in ensuring again that tight regulatory framework, and the CSE chairman talks about new legal measures and amendments to the act that is expected to bring in and introduce these financial instruments. So how aggressively is the SEC looking at this?
Yeah, so whenever these have been proposed, actually we have got support from the Asian Development Bank as well for some of these initiatives. And once the framework, the basic framework has been prepared, we have been very quick to approve them. So it's just the legal framework that needs to be done. So we need to ensure investor protection also. Now there is crowdfunding also that can come in as an additional mechanism of raising funds. So these are new products and infrastructure that will be introduced, or I mean crowdfunding through the OTC platform. So all that is being prepared. and very soon we will see some of these products coming in.
You mentioned to protect investors. So how and what new measures have been taken in this regard, especially after the introduction of the new legal framework?
Yes. So Indeewari, I think one concern, not many but very few had at the time the Act was passed, was that administration of the Act, the legal provisions would be a Herculean task. But at that time I said no, we will ensure that everything is in place for the Act to be properly administered, and we have kept that promise. We have prepared rules for all market intermediaries. They were published in February of this year. We have prepared the rules in respect of the 3 market institutions. That was published in May of this year in the Gazette. Then we have prepared the guidelines for supplementary service providers, which was a new category of service providers that was brought in by the new law. Those guidelines are now published on our website. Then the 3 market institutions, one of which is the exchange, they had to, under the new law, they had to have their own rules which had to be approved by the SEC. Those rules have been prepared by the 3 institutions and we have approved them. Now the listing rules, which is a very important piece of, it's not legislation but subsidiary legislation, I would say, that is being completely revamped. Of course the CSE took a little time because they wanted to ensure that all aspects were looked into. That has been brought to us now. We've had 2 rounds of discussions with them, and probably with a 3rd round of discussions we can finalize that and approve. That will be a huge change because the listing framework and the continuous listing requirements are very important for the market to function properly. And one other set of rules that is being finalized are the trading participant rules. Now that again the CSE has drafted, and it is with us at the moment. We've again discussed that with them, and hopefully with another round of discussions we should be able to finalize them. So the entire set of rules that were required under the Act, Indeewari, I'm happy to say it's just 1 year since the new Act was brought in. It was brought in September of last year. So all those rules are now in place. Then one other thing I forgot to say, the collective investment scheme. It was a huge task to finalize a scheme of that nature, which will govern all funds and schemes that will be set up. There can be several new types of funds and schemes that can come in. We finalized that code, we published that in the Gazette. That was also done, if I remember right, in February of this year. So all of that, we have done all of that.
How much of a positive compliance do you see from the stock brokering firms and their contribution to ensuring that this regulatory framework, to all the developments that both sides, from the regulator side and the stock market side, that you implement?
Yeah. So in finalizing these rules, we did not do it on our own. We consulted the industry. We consulted as far as each market intermediary was concerned. The broker community is one of them, one of the main important market intermediaries. We consulted them. It was with their blessings that we finalized those rules. So that one cannot complain, any one of the market intermediaries cannot complain that those rules are not to their liking, or that they are draconian. So we have consulted them. So it is with their input that we have finalized them. So that will bring in a good governance culture. We have also finalized guidelines for stockbrokers. That was done before the passage of the new law. So they are contributing. The market intermediaries are contributing. They are falling in line. They are in compliance with the rules. So I think that is something good that is happening.
You're an investment banker by profession, and we're also talking about crypto, blockchain, and this is something that Sri Lanka seems like we haven't really made our way into officially, but we see a lot of young people who are investing in cryptocurrency. But there was a committee appointed. So what understanding do you have of the progress we've made in understanding this? And again, the stock market, what can you do what role can the stock market play together with the SEC to bring about that regulatory framework to allow investments here?
Sure. So I think first of all you have to look at the regulatory framework is more from a central bank perspective than a capital markets perspective. Unfortunately, the country still has a closed capital account, and I think with the crisis escalating this year, even the limited outflow possibilities that were allowed for Sri Lankans have been now sort of closed off or withheld. So I can't see in this environment that happening soon in Indeewari. I think central bank has already made certain announcements, publications that they are opposed to the crypto framework as it stands now. And I can see their point because it could open us out to certain risk that we are not used to. If you just look at volatility of cryptos, we'll tell you when cryptos were trading at 65,000, everyone said it'll go to 100,000 or rather Bitcoin. And you see it today, it's crashed to 19,000. So I think you have to look at the risk aspects as well and the legality. Unfortunately, world over, if you look at only a very few governments have legalized it or accepted it within their framework. A lot of countries, even our nearest neighbor India, have sort of banned crypto. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I think it's something that needs a far more careful consideration, especially looking at the foreign exchange aspects of how it impacts Sri Lanka. Because if the argument is that it can attract a lot of capital, I think that's a good thing. But also you have to look at how outflows may happen informally through the sector and why we need to control those. So I think we probably need to tread a bit carefully in this aspect, and I would say give it more time in the before we really embark upon saying crypto. But from a technological perspective, I think blockchain has a lot to offer. So a lot of people misunderstand crypto with blockchain. So blockchain is the technology that enables crypto. I think the usage of blockchain technology in various aspects of the business and even for the exchange is something we are exploring. But I think crypto will probably have to wait till maybe central bank gives the go-ahead.
To stay with us, we're in conversation with the Chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Viraj Dayaratne, and Chairman of the Colombo Stock Exchange, Dilshan Wirasekara. And we're talking about Sri Lanka's capital markets challenges and opportunities ahead. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're joining us at Hyde Park on Ada Derana 24, and we're talking about Sri Lanka's capital markets and now the opportunities ahead for us in Sri Lanka and the markets. I'd like to talk a little about the stock market and the SOE, the state-owned enterprise listing, because this has been a big issue. We saw the President himself talking about this in Parliament and the need to revive these state-owned enterprises that have been making losses. But in terms of listing, what is the update so far?
So I think I mentioned this to you probably at a previous program also. The stock exchange remains ready to list SOEs, right? And I think we've also looked at a special framework to enable the listing of SOEs, both in terms of equity as well as debt, because I think the current listing rules may not fit all or some of those SOEs that are looking at listing. So we've, along with the SEC, sort of come up with a separate framework that will enable that. The exchange, like I said, remains ready, and it's more from a point of a policy decision by government whether they actually use this platform for privatization or choose another path. From a perspective of what the public have been asking and what people have been talking about, I think a big concern is that some of those SOEs are a burden on the government and on the nation, right? That they are not held accountable in terms of their profitability or any other parameter. A normal listed company would. So in a listed company in Indeewari, you have listing rules that you have to comply to. You have criteria that you need to make sure you meet, especially with regard to your shareholders. And that, I think, is what most of our SOEs lack. So when you list on the exchange, you will automatically have to comply to these listing rules. You will be accountable to your shareholders. And I think, like any private company that's currently sort of listed on the exchange, you would be driven by your ROEs, your profitability, certain profit matrix that you would want to sort of ensure. So I feel that's the best way to achieve some of these parameters for ISOEs is by listing, because then that compliance to those listing rules to be being held accountable to your shareholders automatically happens. And then that would in turn change those companies' governance structures and make sure that they comply with good governance practices and principles that most of the private companies adapt. So I think that's probably the easiest way for the government to choose. There are certain perceptions that the exchange doesn't widely represent the Sri Lankan public, and I have to concede to some extent that is true, because we have only 900,000 CDS accounts currently that are opened, and of which only about 60,000, 65,000 are considered as active accounts. So when you look at it, you think it's only a small segment, but that can change, right? And we are doing everything in our power to sort of broad base investor ownership, onboard more Sri Lankans. We were talking about how making capital markets a subject for the curriculum so that there is more financial literacy, which I think is one of the biggest causes to hold this expansion back. And if we do that, the wider public, the Sri Lankan public, can be stakeholders of capital markets. And I think if we achieve that, probably the government also would then have more confidence to list these SOEs, because it will be a wider representation. So from an exchange point of view, we are working on those initiatives to sort of broad base ownership, have more of Sri Lankan public investing in equities, and hopefully that will encourage the government then to choose that platform to list these SOEs and bring about that discipline and structure that I think most of our SOEs direly need.
Whether it's broad-basing the stock market or bringing in more investors and creating that investor confidence overseas, I'd like to ask you, as the SEC chairman, when we talk about financial literacy, we still feel that in Sri Lanka there is minimal, the understanding on stock market investments, whether it's among youth or the average citizen. Why there is this lagging part where the stock market and the SEC has been talking for a long time about creating awareness? You had a lot of programs, but yet we feel that the overall population is not educated on investments, and the question about whether a middle-income earner could build wealth by investing in the stock market, or whether you will lose out because many have actually experienced that too, and that too is probably because of lack of awareness. So what programs are you bringing in the future to address this?
Yeah, so creating awareness is a very serious issue, and we need to do a lot more in order to create that awareness. But on the other hand, in Indeewari, there's a lot that has been done which many would not know. Due to the restrictions in movement and having mass gatherings, the CSE and the SEC could not have seminars, because the CSE and the SEC have been in the habit of going to the outstations and having seminars for would-be investors as to how the market operates, and trying to give them that much needed knowledge about investing in the capital market. But as an alternative, we have reached out to social media, and let me tell you, the SEC has a Twitter account, a YouTube channel, the Facebook account. So through all of that, we've done quite a bit, although maybe many would not know. And that has been very successful. We, on a daily basis, there is a post on Twitter, something about the capital market. Then we, as the chairman of the CSE said, we've reached out to the Ministry of Education, and they have undertaken that with the revamping of the school curriculum in 2023, they will include capital markets as a subject, not only at maybe not only at the ordinary level, but from a very young age. And we have promised them that we will give them the content and even train some of the teachers. So they have promised us that that will be done. And
how long will that take? Do you
so
know?
that is at the time they will revise the school curriculum. They told us in 2023, so which is not too far away.
Right.
So that's a long-term plan. So in the short term, as I said, we have these social media campaigns that we do, and then there is in order to attract family businesses, in order to, it's not only the investors, even the family businesses, the companies which are not listed, we need to attract them. So even they have to be given that knowledge about the benefits of listing. We've had an investor forum. There was a family business forum that we had. I think that was in 2021, where we gave that information out to the companies that the potential in order to list. Then the SEC created actually produced 4 short animated videos which are being relayed, which gives again information about the capital market, the do's and the don'ts. So there's a lot that is happening in Indeewari, which people may not be aware. But let me tell you, I think the fact that there have been a lot of youngsters who opened accounts. The most of the new accounts that were opened have been those between the age of 18 and 40. So actually there has been that can be attributed, the initiatives that both the SEC and the CSE have taken and paid off. That's why I think those who are tech savvy have come in, the younger generation.
Right. So
what we need to do now is to tap the others, maybe the over 40s also, to come into the market. That's why I was just discussing with the CSE chairman last week. We approved a plan that had been prepared together with the CSE to go once again. Now the situation has improved. We can have mass gatherings. We can go out to the outstations and have programs where we can educate the investors, tell them the investor protection measures that are in place as to why they should invest, and also about being having to be cautious in making investments.
and patient.
And patient, that's right.
So the question again about, you said most of the new CDS accounts have been opened among youngsters between the ages of 18 and 40. But how much do they have this understanding of being long-term investors? Because we've seen many enter really soon and exit sooner. So how does the stock market look at addressing this?
I think in the way you use the correct term, you said be patient. So that is something that they have to bear in mind, because investments in the capital market are ideally long term or medium term. Short term, yes, there are those who are day traders, that's not a bad thing. But think of the long term, be patient, understand what the capital market is all about, be aware of the dangers, the pitfalls, not be too greedy, not be avaricious. Maybe gradually improve your investments. Don't invest large sums of money in one go. Get used to the market and gradually increase your investments.
But what benefits would they have in being a long-term investor rather than making a quick buck and exiting?
So I think again you're looking at your returns. So obviously it's your returns. Now end of the day you invest in the market for a return, expecting a return, and as long as that return outperforms certain other benchmarks, or if you take even inflation, that's what you're looking at. Now in the country where we have inflation at 70%, interest rates are still lagging behind at 25-30, but you may have capital market instruments or shares that possibly over a medium term can outdo that inflation. So I think from an investor perspective, each individual needs to profile themselves and see what sort of a mix of a portfolio I should have. So I don't think it's a blanket long-term investment or a medium-term or short-term. You can have a mix of investments. Part of your portfolio can be long-term shares, value shares, part could be high-yield dividend shares looking at income, and part can be more sentiment-driven stocks that you're sort of use for day trading. But just to come back and say one thing, I think part of our issue as a country has been that this capital formation and direction of that capital to sectors of the economy has not happened through our capital markets the way it has happened in other parts of the world. If you look at India or any other country, why are they far more developed? Because the activity, the economic activity that is taking place and capital formation is happening in capital markets, and that capital raised is efficiently going to sectors that is most desired. Now, unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, for the last 70 odd years post-independence, we are doing that through our banking sector. So typically a business raises capital by going to a bank and borrowing, right, as opposed to capital markets, and that isn't an efficient way to raise capital. So what we are hoping to do with all these initiatives is that create a platform where companies can actually raise capital, and then that capital is efficiently directed to sectors at a far cheaper cost than what it would to do a traditional bank financing. So we hope that all these things will pay off in that direction.
We've been talking about challenges in terms of improving financial instruments to other challenges, but in terms of increasing corporate listings, are there any challenges for the stock exchange?
Yeah, so we had a good year in 2021, partly because there was an incentive given out by the budget as well, that you had a 3-year sort of a tax reduction, a 50% reduction on your tax, that stimulated companies to come and list. That has been since taken off. So it's now really about valuations, accessing capital. The biggest hindrance that we've actually had is that the valuations of our market have not really reflected valuations companies believe that they should raise capital. So when the market is trading at a low multiple, to list a company with an IPO at a much higher multiple is a bit of a difficult take. So that, I think, has been the biggest drawback for us. However, looking at recent performances, I am confident that these valuations are going to come to a better place over the next maybe 6-12 months time, and that would then incentivize new companies to come and list. We've also, Indeewari now cater to different segments of companies. A lot of people had a perception the stock market is, for a big blue chip sort of a company to come and raise capital. It's not the case, right? We have the main board that has a particular criteria. We have the Dirisavi board that's more medium-sized criteria, and now we have the SME board that is for a smaller company, even to raise a 50 million rupee sort of equity deal size. So I think we've also now change the scope of those boards so that it caters to a wider audience, and hopefully we'll have more Sri Lankan companies coming and making use of that.
We also have been talking about demutualization for some time. Will this happen, and what will be the outcome? What do you think the perception among investors would be? There has been talk whether there will be questions of insider trading to other manipulation of stock exchange, stock market as a result. So how do you look at all these views?
Yeah, so demutualization, the aim is to ensure that there is better governance as far as the stock exchange is concerned, rather than a member-driven structure, to have a demutualized structure. So unfortunately, Indeewari, the delay, I'm not very happy to say this, but it's with the stakeholders. There was a bill that was prepared, and that was, I think it was even taken up in Parliament, but that did not go through. Then after the present commission, after we took office, we've had several rounds of discussions. So there was discussion about some of the clauses that were there, some of the sections that were there. Then about the allocation of shares, all of that was discussed, and the broker community, the member firms wanted to look at that and then come back to the SEC. Originally, it was proposed that they will come back in April, but then they wanted to further look into the matter, and then I was promised that they will be getting back to the SEC in September, but we are nearing the end of September also. Unfortunately, we haven't heard from them, so I would say the ball is in their court now, and the SEC is ready. We are ready to discuss with them. Maybe once we are able to agree on the sections, the content,
But what are their biggest challenges, and why do they say they need more time?
Yeah, so I think they wanted to be a little more. They wanted to be aware of the structure that would be in place post demutualization. Then the allocation of how the shares would be allocated amongst the member firms, because we are to have a capital market development fund. The allocation between the fund and the member firms, whether it should be a 50-50 allocation, or whether it should be a 60-40 or 70-30. That was one of the impediments in finalizing this piece of legislation. But what I told them was, look here, that is something that we can discuss and agree, and ultimately the decision would lie with the policymakers, because it will have to be passed by Parliament. So the policymakers will have to agree to that allocation, and that is something that can be discussed and mutually agreed upon.
Right.
But unfortunately there is delay, so I reiterate the ball is in their court.
If I can also probably respond to that as a member firm. So I think the chairman is right to say that there is a delay. I think the delay more has been because of a disagreement on the percentage of ownership and how it is structured. Currently, the Colombo Stock Exchange is a company incorporated by guarantee. From a legal perspective, it's owned by the 15 trading members, right? Now, when you demutualize this, there is a particular structure that was proposed, and the brokers counter-proposed. Saying, okay, this is the percentage that it should be sort of a split on. We've not come to an agreement on that, so that has been the biggest hindrance, and I think everyone knows that. The second has been how we actually demutualize. What sort of governance structure is this demutualized exchange going to have? What is the composition of the board? How are they going to be appointed? So for that, what we've done is we've engaged with the IFC Indeewari. So we've actually got consultants from the IFC, which has part funded this whole process, and the brokers have essentially coughed up the rest. And we are now almost nearing completion of that assignment. So then we will have a IFC sort of recommendation of how demutualization should happen, how that post-demutualization exchange should operate. And we are hopeful that we can meet the deadline we promised to the chairman, and maybe it might be delayed by a week or so, but very soon that we can revert back to the SEC with our sort of recommendations. And then it's about getting agreement of all parties concerned, the government, the SEC, the CSE, and the broking members to agree on this split.
So you're speaking right now on behalf of?
I'm wearing my hat of the broking firms now.
Well, I think our topic today was Sri Lanka's capital markets, challenges and opportunities ahead. We have a very few minutes to wrap up the show, but again, in terms of addressing challenges and going forward to look at opportunities, especially, as we said, attract global investors. What is the outlook for us going forward? I open the question to both parties.
Yeah, so I think it's the confidence factor as far as investors are concerned. So I think the measures that are presently in place gives that confidence. Of course, the macroeconomic conditions situation has to improve for us to see an improvement in the capital market. Well, as far as more companies listing, there again, as the CSE chairman said, we have a proper legal framework. The government gave incentives. Of course, it's not continuing during the coming year. But the listing framework has been developed in such a way that they will be able to meet the requirements. So it's a question of the situation improving, and the message that the SEC what we would like to give is come into the market. We would like to see more listings as well
going forward.
Yeah, I'm also quite bullish in Indeewari on the market, and I think we've turned a corner as a country. I expect macro stability to prevail and the situation to even improve going forward. So we are confident that these would result in the market dynamics also being positive. That will hopefully give good earnings to companies, good returns to companies, and essentially then investors also making profits out of it. So my appeal really is to the public in general and to the foreign investor community, help us, help Sri Lanka out. We are in a situation where we need investment to this country. So please do come. We've done everything possibly that we could in terms of ensuring a fair, equitable market that is operated for all stakeholders. So please come and invest in Sri Lanka to help this country. That's my final message. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. We had with us the Chairman of Securities and Exchange Commission, President's Council, Viraj Dayaratne, joining us. Thank you for your time here.
Pleasure to be here.
We have also been in conversation tonight with the Chairman of the Colombo Stock Exchange, Dilshan Wirasekara. Thank you very much for your time here at Hyde Park.
Pleasure, Indeewari. Thank you.
We've been talking about Sri Lanka's capital markets, the challenges now and opportunities ahead. Thank you for joining in. We'll see you again next week at the same time with yet another discussion. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.